So last class we worked with being able to analyze congruent figures, right? Congruent triangles. What we're going to learn today is we're going to start working with today and then the next class different ways of being able to tell if triangles are congruent or not. Not by analyzing everything, but by being given certain parts, right? And so what we're going to be working with today is something called SSS and SAS congruence. And right now this should mean nothing to you. All this should literally be, it's just a bunch of S's and A's, right? SSS and SAS congruence. And what this is, it's different ways to be able to tell if triangles are congruent or not based on the parts that they give you. So for example, SSS represents certain parts of a triangle. SAS represents certain parts of a triangle. So basically what this means is if they give you these three parts, SSS, it means that the triangles are congruent. If they give you SAS, those three parts, it means that the triangles are congruent. But now let's go into what it actually means, because again, SSS doesn't mean anything to you, nor should it. So now, I don't know if some of you realize it already by now, but what SSS stands for is side, side, side. Right? SSS literally stands for side, side, side. And what this means is, let's say I had two triangles, right? Okay, just coming up with any two triangles. What SSS means is if they have three pairs of sides that are congruent, then the triangles automatically are congruent. So this is what I mean by SSS. We have these two triangles, right? Let's say that I put this here. I wanted to make this side the same as that. So put one tick mark there, one tick mark there, right? I wanted to make this side congruent to this side. 2 there, 2 there. Now I want to make these two sides congruent, so I'll put 3 and 3, right? What SSS means, and this is what I wanted to show you, it means that for triangles to be congruent, we need 3 pairs of sides, right, to be exactly the same. So like for example, we see this, we know that this side is congruent to that side, right? That's one pair. So we would represent that with an S, S for a side. We have a pair of sides right there. Then let's see. We have that this side is congruent to that side because this has 2 tick marks. That means that those two sides are the same, so that would be a side. And then we see this. We know that this has 3 tick marks. This has 3 tick marks. Those two are the same. So since we have these two sides that are the same, that would be a pair of sides. So now what SSS means is if we have these 3 sides all congruent to those 3 sides, we know that these two triangles are going to be congruent. What SSS means is that the triangles are going to be congruent. You don't need to worry about numbers, all of that. SSS literally means if you have 3 pairs of sides that are congruent, then the triangles are automatically congruent. Because if their sides are the same, parts are going to be the same, all of that. It's the same size and all of that. So again, when you see SSS, it just means that triangles are congruent because we have 3 pairs of sides. So that's what SSS means, and we're going to practice with it. Then there was another one called SAS, right? And again, now I'm pretty sure that some of you can start piecing these together and start figuring out what SAS stands for. What SAS stands for is literally side, angle, side. Right? Side, angle, side. And so what this tells us, and this is where sometimes it can get a little tricky, and this is what we're going to practice. Same thing. It's us needing 2 sides and an angle, right? If we have 2 pairs of sides and an angle, automatically we know that those triangles are going to be congruent, right? So what SAS means, again, SAS means we're going to need 2 pairs of sides and we're going to need a pair of angles, right? So first thing, let's give you a pair of sides, right? Let's make this side, it could have been anyone. Let's make those two the same, right? So that's a pair of sides, that's a side, that's a side, that's a pair of sides. But again, it's not just that we need 2 sides, we need 2 pairs of sides, right? So that right there is 1 pair. We need another pair of sides, right? So let's make this one congruent to that one, right? So right there, automatically, let's start looking at what we have. we know that that represents one side because those two are the same. We know that these two represent one side because those are the same, right? 2 and 2. So far what we have is SS. And let's say I were to just give you this and nothing else, automatically we would know we can't tell if this is congruent, because for it to be congruent, we either need to have SSS, 3 sides, or SAS. For it to be SSS, we need 3 sides. This is an SSS because we only have 2. It couldn't be SAS because, again, SAS means you need 2 sides and an angle. Right now, we only have 2 sides. What we need now is an angle, right? And be very careful, because the most important thing is seeing where it is. Because right now, we know that the angle is between those 2 sides, right? The angle is between the sides. So if the angle is between the sides here, the angle needs to be between the sides here. The only way possible. The angle needs to be between the sides. Because if it's not between, then it's not SAS. For it to be SAS, the angle needs to be between the sides. Angle needs to be between those 2 sides, which it is. So right there, again, we have 1 pair of sides, 2 pair of sides. We have a pair of angles, so that would be an A for angle. And then we also see that the angle is between those sides, right? This is between those. So if the angle is between those sides, automatically we know that these triangles are congruent by SAS, right? Congruent by SAS. And that's how you always use this. It's just trying to figure out ways to tell if triangles are congruent. I understand that some of you may be confused because you've never worked with this before or ever seen this. We're going to work with this again next class, guys, but I did want to start giving you an introduction. And now we're going to see, right? I'm going to show you how we actually use this to see if triangles are congruent or not. Because again, so far we only have 2 ways to tell if triangles are congruent. Only 2. It's either congruent by SSS or SAS. If it's not one of those 2, it's not congruent. That means congruent, right? This means congruent. If it's not one of those 2, then we know automatically it's not congruent, right? So I'm going to give you triangles, right? Let's say I give you this triangle right there. I'm going to give you this triangle right there. I want to know if these triangles are congruent, right? So I'm going to give you, let's say I give you this. Let's say I give you that. And let's say I give you that. Say I give you that. Now let's analyze what we have. For it to be congruent, again, we know automatically it can't be SAS because SAS needs an angle. They don't label any angles, right? But let's see what we have. We have, that's a pair of sides because that has 1, that has 1. So that would be an S. Again, always it's pairs, guys. That doesn't count as 2 separate sides. That's 1 pair of sides. We know that this and this are congruent because they have 2. So that would be another S. Always label on the same triangle too. And then we know that that has 3, that has 3. That would be another side. So we know that we have 3 sides. So automatically we know it's congruent. Congruent by SSS. Right? That would be 1. That's how we use this, guys. It's seeing if we have 3 sides, it's going to be congruent, right? If we only had 2 sides, it wouldn't be congruent, right? Let's see this now. Again, all we're trying to do is figure out if these triangles are congruent or not congruent, right? By applying SSS and SAS. Let's say now that I gave you this. Right? Let's say I gave you that. Let's say I gave you this. Same thing. All we're trying to do for all these is figure out whether they're congruent or not, right? I'm going to give you this side. I'm going to give you that, right? I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you that. I'm going to put the angle here. I'm going to put the angle there, right? And again, sometimes it doesn't look exactly the same, but it's okay. You have to go by what they give you. So now let's look at the parts, right? See what they give. So that has 1 tick mark. That has 1 tick mark. That's a side, right? That would be a side. That has 2 tick marks. That has 2 tick marks. That would be another side. This has a curve. That has a curve. That would be an angle. That's a pair of angles. And then the most important thing, we see that this angle is between those two sides. The angle is between them. It's SAS. So automatically, if the angle is between the sides, we know it's congruent. We know it's congruent by SAS. Right? Because again, the angle is between the sides. Always remember, for it to be SAS, the angle needs to be between the sides, guys. Always needs to be between them. I want to do 3 more with you guys just to see if you get the hang of it. Let's say now I were to give you this. Right? Say you got that. Let's say you got that. I'm going to give you just that and that. I'm going to give you that and that. Right? Give you nothing else. And I want to know now if these are congruent or not. Right? So again, let's look at what we have. 1 tick mark, so that's a side. That has 2, that has 2, that would be another side. And now, do they give us anything else, right? We only had that, we had that. There's no tick marks here, and the whole thing is we can never assume, guys. So the fact that they don't give us anything else, we don't have another angle, we don't have another side. So if we only have a side and a side, if we only have 2 sides, we need 3, right? The fact that we don't have anything other than 2 sides, automatically, it's not congruent, okay? It's not congruent because all we have is 2 sides. We always need 3 parts. We only have 2 parts at the moment. So if we only have 2 parts, it's not congruent. We need more than that. Again, let's just see if you guys are getting comfortable with it. Hopefully you guys are. Let's say I give you this then. This is now when it's going to show me if you guys actually understand it. Let's say I had this. Okay. I had that. I'm going to give you that and that. I'm going to give you that and that. And then I'm going to give you this and that. Okay? So again, let's look at what we have. We know that this here, 1 and 1, that's a side. Right? 2 and 2, we know that's a side. Here and there, 1 arch and 1 arch, that's an angle. And now the one answer that people would pick would be SAS. It's not SAS. The actual answer for this is not congruent. And this is the trickiest one. This is sometimes the one issue that people have. This is not congruent. And the reason it's not congruent, we do have 2 sides and we do have an angle. So a lot of people would pick SAS. But the reason it's not SAS is because the angle needs to be between the sides. The angle has to be between those sides. This angle is not between those sides. 2 sides are here, the angle is after it. It's before it, it's after it. The angle is not between. For it to be SAS, the angle would need to be here in between. But the fact that the angle is not in between, that's why it's not SAS. For it to be SAS, angle needs to be between the sides. And when it's not between the sides, it's not congruent because instead it would be an angle and then the 2 sides. And then again, whenever it's ASS, guys, it's not congruent. For it to be congruent, it has to be SAS. The angle has to be between the sides. Angle would have to be between those sides. So always be careful with that, guys. If it's SAS, make sure the angle's always between the sides, guys. And now the last one I want to do with you guys, just to make sure you actually got a good hold of it. It's also something else I want to show you, which we're going to be working with more in the next lesson. Let's say I give you something that looked like this. And this is actually one of the most important lessons I can teach you for today. Let's say I had that. That's 1, that's 2, that's 1, that's 2. Let's see what we have, right? And I'm going to tell you this much. This is going to be congruent. It's going to be congruent, and it's going to be congruent by SSS. Here's why. So we see that. That has 1, that has 1, so that's a side. That has 2, that has 2, that's a side. And now people are going to look at this and say, you know what? There's only 2 pairs of sides. There's no 3rd side, so how can it be SAS? How can it be SSS? Where's that 3rd one coming from? Because we only have 2. The 3rd one is in the middle. Now the thing is, even though there's no tick marks, and the best way I can show it is this way. If I were to put these two markers separate from each other, you don't know if they're equal, you don't know if they're the same size, right? If I now put them perfectly next to each other, even though there's no numbers, the fact that they're perfectly next to each other lets me know that they are the exact same size, right? So when they're separate, you don't know. When they're together, you know perfectly that they're the same. Same idea. If they were separate, you don't know. But the fact that they become together, you see that they're exactly the same. It's that same idea. It's this side here in the middle, where even though there's no tick marks, the fact that those two sides are together, when those sides are together, automatically we know that that's the same. So right there, that's our third side. And again, we know it's the same because even though there's no tick marks, they're together. The fact that they're together, automatically, you know that that side's going to be equal to each other. Because if I were to separate these triangles, it would look something like this. Right? It would look something, sorry about that. It would look something like that. That would have 2, this would have 2, that would have 1, that would have 1. And now, the fact that we brought those two together, right? We know that this side is the same as that one. And we know that those are the same because they're together. There's no extra, there's no less on each side. So the fact that whenever you see the sides together, it means that that side is congruent, right? So it would be SSS. Just always be careful. The only time you can ever see this and do this is if the triangles are together. If they're together, you know that that side is always going to be the same, okay? So just remember, guys, 2 ways to learn if triangles are congruent: SSS, SAS. For it to be SAS, angle needs to be between the sides. And then tomorrow we're going to learn 3 other ways: AAS, ASA, and then HL. Hope you guys are doing well. Take care.